Okay, good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody that is online. Thank you very much for attending this webinar on in-ear monitors and Shure PSM systems. My name is Jack Drury. I work in the UK Pro team at Shure. I look after market development over here. And with me on the call, we have Sasha. Say hello, Sasha.
Hi.
Excellent stuff. Sasha is an applications engineer based in Germany and is very much somebody who spends a lot of time working with our equipment, working with in-ear monitor systems and radio microphones. And he's going to be taking us through today's presentation. Just before Sasha kicks off, I'd like to direct your attention to the question and answer function that you should see in your screen. There will be time for some questions at the end of Sasha's presentation, but feel free to ask any questions during the presentation that you might have. Myself and my colleague Jürgen, who is also an applications engineer based in Germany, will be moderating this, answering questions as we go. And if there are some questions we feel will be beneficial to ask at the end, then we will address them at the end of Sasha's presentation. But with that, I'm going to hand over to Sasha, who's going to take us through, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Jack. I'd like to welcome you as well. I heard there's plenty of people from Mexico, India, from Spain, Portugal, all over the place, and of course UK and all over Europe. And I'd like to welcome you to this webinar introducing in-ear monitoring to many of you. Some of you may already have used in-ear monitoring. I'd like to begin with a short introduction, how it developed, the history, and those sorts of things. And then I'd like to show you all the modes. And if you have any questions during the presentation, type them in. On your right-hand side, you should be able to see a questions pane. And I would like to start now. So what is monitoring? So if you're a musician and you already shared the stage with others, you're probably aware that there are always some possibilities to listen to yourself as well as to your bandmates. If we look at a regular stage, you can see usually the performer is equipped with a microphone for sure. And some people, if they're not familiar with being on a stage, I asked people who are not musicians, sometimes they point to the right-hand side and say, okay, this is a monitor. That's correct. But this time we're talking about audio. And this wedge right here is our monitor to hear ourselves when we sing or when we present our music. Here we can see a larger stage. This is a big festival in Germany. Many of you may have heard of Wacken already. And you can see Motorhead perform here. This has been taken a couple of years ago when Lemmy Kilmister was still alive. And my dear colleague Ursula Helmstedt was there. She did some monitoring, not for Motorhead, but she had the chance to meet them or to at least get this picture to you. And as you can see, there's 4 wedges, full blown in front of Lemmy. He was almost deaf at the end of his lifetime, and there was a lot of that was due to heavy volumes, and as you can see, there's full stacks behind him, so it must have been really, really loud. And of course, he was pretty old, but he always neglected using in-ear monitoring, and that's something that I want to prevent with you. In this course, we will learn what the benefits of in-ear monitorings are, and one is definitely protect your hearing. This is another stage. You have a closer look. There's the lead guitar player. This is, as I was told, Metallica stage, and Kirk Hammett usually has his own monitors, and James Hetfield has his own monitors. He also sings, so if you take this into account, there's another mix on there, so more singing, right? And on the right-hand side, there's Robert Trujillo's bass sound. And if you were to walk across the stage, you would hear 3 different mixes. And this is usually a pretty small stage for Metallica. As you may have heard, they also use in-ear monitoring because when they move across the stage, they want to listen to their monitor sound even when they're on the furthest part of the stage. So they wouldn't be able to carry their wedge with them, and so they have everything in their in-ears. So what exactly is in-ear monitoring? As I pointed out already, usually you would have your wedge or stage monitor right in front of you, and this exactly is what is audio monitoring. And in-ear monitoring is using a earphone inside of your ear canal, and it can deliver the sound you would usually have with your wedges into your ears. The components of an in-ear monitoring system, if you look closely, are as follows. You have a transmitter, usually set to a frequency, and it transmits the audio to your receiver, and the receiver converts the signal so you can listen to it via your earphones. If you look closely at this picture, you can see almost all musicians on that stage are using in-ear monitoring. You can see it right here. You can see it with the saxophone player, and this guy right here, the lead singer, he doesn't like to use in-ear monitoring. That's why they still kept wedges on that stage. And this time around, this guy cannot move. The other ones, they can move freely across the stage because they have everything on their ears, and they can move up to 100 meters and still hear what the monitor right here would put into their ears when they're right in front of them. Here we have a picture of a duet, and as you can see highlighted here, this is an earphone, and she uses in-ear monitoring. As you can see, this is a PSM 1000 from Shure, and she has one in and one out. Why does she do that? There's not only benefits, sometimes there's downsides too. Some people want to have more atmospheres in some passages when they sing. So let's listen to the audience closely or something else. And they take out one earplug. Usually that's not what I would recommend. We recommend having both ears in, and usually you should have a atmosphere mic pointed towards the audience and mix it in your mix, but more of that later. What are the benefits? The benefits are you have a better sound for the musicians and the audience. Usually, if you look at this microphone right here, if I were to sing into the microphone and I would have the monitor right in front of me, and the audio signal would be the same, what I would sing into this microphone, it would feed back. This is usually what happens quite a lot with musicians starting out. They always say, oh, this microphone tends to be feedbacking or whatnot. Usually this is an arrow of the user. So you have to be aware where to point the microphone, because if you get the signal into the microphone more than one time, so meaning from the speaker, then of course it's gonna be introduced twice and so on and so on, and it will eventually cause feedback, and that's what you hear with a big whoop or some other sound, and that's really something you want to prevent. Also, if you have full-blown amplifiers such as guitar amps, you would have a lot of bleed. If you use in-ear monitoring, you can turn the amplifier down and amp the cabinet itself and introduce it to your mix, so you have your individual mix. You don't have to turn up the volume with the amplifiers. And that being said, there's less bleed from the amplifiers to all the mics that are on stage, because if you have been at several stages, even when they're really huge, you always have microphones to pick up the individual instruments, and the louder it gets, the more microphone bleed it will result in. So meaning if the amplifier is full blown, as you can see here, the overhead microphones will pick up that sound too, and there's no way the front of house will be able to get this sound out of the microphones, because then you won't have the overhead sound. No auditory masking. That means you have a monitor signal and a PA signal. PA signal means public address. So everything that is blasting into the audience from the PA signal plus the monitor signal will cancel out some frequencies, and some frequencies will be added. So some frequencies will be really loud, and some other frequencies you won't hear because they would be canceled out. That's a physical thing called auditory masking. And if everyone on stage uses in-ear monitoring, you don't have to turn up the monitors as loud. So thus preventing auditory masking for your audience. And the sound is, of course, always the same, no matter if you have a larger stage or a club gig or rehearsals. You set your individual mix one time, and it stays like that, no matter where you are. And you simply open the case, turn it on, and up you go. And what I was trying to point out earlier was the isolation you get from in-ear monitoring, since these have different earpieces, which of course isolate you from the rest of the world. They give you up to 37 dBs of isolation, so you won't hear a loud amp, you won't hear what anybody else tries to tell you, and so on. You have to be careful if you use them walking in the streets, because of course you won't hear any cars rushing by or something like that. Reduced risk of feedback. If everyone is using in-ear monitoring in the band, you won't risk any feedback. Because as I pointed out earlier, you won't have the second signal feeding into your microphone again, since it stops right here, and everything is in your ear. You sing into your microphone, and each and everyone can get their mix of the microphone you use, and there wouldn't be any need for wedges or monitors on stage. So then again, no risk of feedback, right? Of course, it gives you freedom of movement if you don't have any wedges, monitor boxes in front of you. There's a lot more space on the stage because, as you should know, the monitors are really large. If you have active monitors, they're even larger because they have the preamps in there, and thus you will have a better performance usually for your audience. And of course, they are heavy too, so there's no need to carry them from your rehearsal into the van, drive to the venue, unloading, get them on stage, and everything back. So inner monitoring will save your back. Of course, I don't want to be the one only talking about benefits. I want to be honest with you. Of course, there are some downsides too. We always tell people not to use in-ear monitoring if they haven't used it before. You need to get time. You need your time to get used to the sound in your head. And the stereo image follows no matter where you're looking at. So saying if you have like your audio stage in front of you with the drummer right in the middle of the mix, and you turn your head to the right or to the left, it will still be in the middle. And that's something to get used to. Also, you have acoustical isolation. So communication with your bandmates will be pretty difficult. Some people tend to put out the one side of the plug, or yeah, have some sort of chat, not using in-ear monitoring at all. For a little while to discuss what song is next, or some sorts of these things. Of course, you have a little acoustical response as well. So the audience in front of you, you can see them, but because of the isolation, you won't be able to listen to their singing or to their cheering, or sort of that thing. Of course, there are solutions to this. If you want to communicate with your bandmates, a lot of professional bands who use in-ear monitoring, they use something that's called Optigate, and this is like a sensor that opens up the mic when you walk towards it. This can be used to talk to your bandmates. This is usually connected to each and everyone's mix, and you can discuss which song comes next and so on. So there's a way around it. The missing feedback from the audience. This is one photograph I took in Stuttgart when I was at the Rival Sons concert. And as you can see right here, really small, almost not visible. This is a shotgun microphone picking up the audience sounds. So the atmosphere of the cheering audience. And this is usually fed into the mix of the individual musicians, so they can hear if they're singing or not, or respond to your songs. So this is a way around it. Monitoring modes. If we are to discuss the different modes, of course, you have the basic one, which is where does the signal come from? And the signal comes from the auxiliary outputs of your console. Your mixing desk has outputs named aux. Usually they're line level, and you feed them into your transmitters, and then you get the signal onto your into your receiver and into your what you're aware of is that we have mono signal. That is usually what you hear from the monitors. So the wedges right in front of you when you're on stage, they're always mono, unless you have two on the left and the right side, then you can create a stereo image, but usually they're mono only. And what happens here, if you look at the transmitter, you feed the signal from the console. This is a mono signal, and you transmit it and you receive it on, and it gets put to your ears, and this is on both ears. So if you have your balance left and right, you can see this is the volume level, left and right, and this one should mimic the balance. If you put it to the left, of course, you will hear everything on the left-hand side, and if you put it to the right, all the volume in the right ear will be there, but nothing in the left ear. If we look at a stereo image, beginning with the PSM 300, and of course with the more sophisticated models, PSM 900 and PSM 1000, you can use a stereo mode, feeding two individual signals for a stereo image. You can feed it through two auxiliary outputs of your console, and you can mix them wherever you want them to be. Let's say the rhythm guitar on the left-hand side and the bass player on the right-hand side, or anything in between. And what you can do then with your balance is put the rhythm section, if you have it on left, full blown, or if you want the lead section, for example, you can put it all the way to the right-hand side. And the clue now is the mix mode. This is really where it gets fun. You can feed the transmitter two signals. We changed it from left to right because it's two individual mixes. You can create your singer mix, for example, and you create your band mix, and they are transmitted and summed in the receiver. So we have 1 and 2 together on both ears, illustrated with 1 and 2. And now we have the possibility to change the balance of my signal 1 and 2. And this is where the fun is, because, for example, I'm a lead guitar player, and I am to play a solo, for example, and I want to listen to a certain pattern, what the drummer plays. I can really go ahead and change the balance the way I want to listen to it, turn the volume up, which is of course another knob, and I can hear everything as I want it, really individually. Some examples, what are the basic setups for these kinds of use? We learned that there are 3 modes to choose from: the mono mode, stereo mode, and the mix mode. And if you put everything together, taking a regular band, you would have 4 musicians in that example: singer, guitar player, a bass player, and a drummer. We have a stereo mix. And now what we can do here is listen to the left and the right mix on our receivers if they're set to the same frequencies. A question we always get is, how many receivers can I use with that system? Well, if they are tuned to the same frequency, you can use as many receivers as you like. All musicians equipped with the same receiver tuned to the same frequency will have the possibility to listen to that mix. So if everyone is satisfied with the left and right mix, they simply keep the balance in the middle and everyone will get the same stereo mix, right? Usually singers, they tend to be using a separate mix. If you only have one transmitter, you can use one mix for the singer and one for the band. And this usually is a mono mix because stereo would be two, right? And we use one of the stereos as a mono mix for the singer and the other stereo mix for a mono signal for the whole band. So if you turn the balance to the left, you get the singer mix, and if you turn your balance to the right all the way, you will get the mono mix for the whole band, and that is possible for the whole band with only one transmitter. If every one of those musicians wants to use a mono mix, of course you need two transmitters, and those transmitters get fed the separate mono mixes of singer, guitar player, bass player, and drummer. And now what we can do is tune the receivers, as you can see on the image here. Same group, but different channel. As you can see here, it is one, and they tune to frequency number one. So group one, for example, channel one, and put their balance to the far left or the far right, and then they have their individual mono mix. The same with the bass player and the drummer. If they are on the channel number two, you can see in the image they are like putting their balance to the far left and the far right for their individual mono mix. And the band with four musicians now get four individual mono mixes, right? If there are any questions how to set these up, write them in the comments. We'll be happy to answer those questions. On a side note, on the mixing console, you need four auxiliary outputs for the individual mono signals. So meaning singer, guitar player, bassist, and drummer, they need their own mix, and thus needing four auxiliary outputs at the console. Now, if we were to use individual stereo mixes, every musician needs their own transmitter, and of course, again, the receiver and their earphones. And now from 3 units on, we always recommend a combiner. This is the combiner. I will tell you what it is and how it works in a later in our slide later. And as you can see, the singer gets his stereo mix, the guitar player gets his stereo mix, the bass player gets his stereo mix, and now what is shown here is a wired receiver. We also have a wired receiver that is called P9HW, standing for hardwired. So the drummer usually doesn't move, so allowing for a receiver that is static. Wired, not wireless, makes it a little cheaper. So if you want to use that, you can also feel free and get the PSM 900's hardwired receiver. For this setup, you would need eight auxiliary outputs: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8 for the drummer, right? What does PSM stand for? A lot of people ask us, what is PSM? It stands for personal monitoring. One thing I wanted to point out, since there are many people from Europe here, we do have one frequency for all over Europe, which is harmonized, the EU harmonized frequency from 863 to 865 megahertz. And this frequency is license-free for all over Europe. So if you're a professional band touring, you can use this frequency license-free in all the European countries. In some of them, like in Germany, 823 to 832 is license-free as well. But this is not true for all European countries. Before you buy a wireless in-ear monitoring system or a wireless system for singing or whatnot, or for your guitar or whatever, please always make sure to pick the right band, because the regulations have restrictions, and depending in what country you wanted to use them, you need to make sure that it's not licensed. So meaning you would have to have a certificate to use it. Why do I need loop out sockets? That's a question. If you look at the transmitter, usually if you look at the PSM 300, PSM 900, and PSM 1000 Shure in your monitoring systems, they have loop out sockets for the left and for the right signal. And that means that you can take the signal that comes in and use it for another transmitter. So if you had a band mix feeding from the front of house mixer, you can loop them to the next transmitters, to the next transmitters, to the next transmitters. Otherwise, you would have to use an auxiliary out for each and every one, feeding the band mix separately. And of course, it's more cables and more auxiliary outputs. And the loop sockets come in handy when it comes to that. And of course, instead of plenty of outputs, you only have 5 auxiliary outputs for this kind of situation in that example. So this one here is a combiner. This is the smallest combiner we offer. It's made for 4 transmitters, and as you can see, these 4 inputs are actually for the systems you use. So if you have a PSM 300 transmitter, you simply unplug the antenna that comes with the unit, and you take a regular BNC and put it to one of those sockets, and this one antenna will serve up to 4 transmitters, and that saves you space. And of course, if you have it in your rack systems, usually what happens is if you use different antennas, they take away energy, thus producing intermodulations. And to simplify this, this is something that can definitely interrupt or produce dropouts, and you don't want that. So if you use more than 3 transmitters, please use a combiner. A handy thing is that with these cables, you don't need the power supplies for each and every transmitter, because this combiner can feed all 4 transmitters. Also, we have some accessories, battery and loading options for the PSM 300 P3RA. This is the advanced model, the metallic housing, and you can use a battery SB900A. This is also used with the high tier quality Shure products such as ULXD, QLXD, Accent Digital, and so on. Here we see the loading option for only 1. And if you have a PSM 300, PSM 900, or PSM 1000 receiver, you can simply store it in the SBC 200 and can load the battery while you're maybe go out to eat or whatnot, and come back to your show and put it back in. The SBC 800 can load up to 8 of the SB900A, and you can store it in the rack as well. One thing I wanted to point out, a lot of folks ask us, how do I correctly insert my earphone? I brought a couple of earphones with me, and if you like to follow me, I can show you how it works. If you have a closer look at the drivers here, usually you can see an R for the right-hand side, right? And if having some other ones, they're usually red, and blue always stands for the left earpiece. And what I tend to be doing is I wrap the wire around my ear like this, and then I simply plug in the earpiece and push it further in, and do the same thing with my other ear. And then you have this one and simply use it to fix, and then nothing can go wrong, right? We've seen the strangest things. You've seen me putting in these correct, but if you can't read the Shure, of course it's incorrect, and you should turn it around. It takes a little practice, but it's really, really important to correctly insert them into your ear canal and secure them with the wire so it doesn't drop while performing. And of course, if the earpiece is not fixed properly, you will lose a lot of good audio. If it's not sealing properly, for example, you will lose a lot of bass response. Okay, I would like to share some insights with you. When I first used a in-ear monitoring system, what caught me the most was like the mobility to walk all over the stage, to use it everywhere, and it gave me the freedom in combination with a wireless guitar system, so I could move freely wherever I wanted to be on the stage, and it made my performance a lot better. As I said before, going to a gig, and if you have never used in-ear monitoring before, try it at least 2 to 3 times in band rehearsal. set the mix correct, and then it should serve you really, really well, and of course protect your hearing. Now one question for Thomas. Are there any questions I can answer up to now?
We have had some questions come in. Thank you, Sasha, if you'd be able to answer them for us very quickly. We have something from John Dean, who has asked, he owns a PSM 200 system, and he wants to know what the differences are between that system and the PSM 300, 900, and 1000 systems. Are there advantages to upgrading?
I see. Well, the PSM 200 system has been around for quite a while. The PSM 200 system only features the mono mode, so there's no possibility to use the stereo mode or the mix mode. Also, the receiver is a lot larger than the handy PSM 300 you can see here, which is made of metal, apart from the PSM 200 being made of plastic. Also, with the PSM 300 P3RA, you can use the SB900A batteries, as I pointed out earlier. With the PSM 200, I think these were, no, I know those were 9-volt blocks. And of course, battery life is better on AA batteries or SB900A. That is the best option.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That was a great question, John, and a fantastic answer, Sasha. We've got another one here from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Odysseys, who asks, why does the P10R have 2 receiving antennas?
That's a good question. For those who are not familiar with the PSM 1000, PSM 1000 has 1 extra antenna here, and this should give you a better performance, like moving further away from the transmitter and reducing dropouts to another level. The PSM 1000 system is the professional system that we make, and a lot of big stars are using them.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Just looking through the, we've had some new questions arrive. Just see what we have here that would be good to ask to your good self. John Dean has another question that would be quite good to show, actually. He asks, can you show us how to pull the rubber bands off? They're very tricky, he is finding on his own. So I assume he means the earbuds on the actual headphones themselves.
Of course I can show you that. This is something that is really important, since the plugs need to be changed quite regularly, and of course you are ought to clean them like every time. I would like you to clean it under water. And what you do is, like, I tend to be using my thumb and get in there in the gap and simply slide it out, turning the earpiece counterclockwise like this. Does this help?
I think that's perfect. Thank you very much, Sasha, for that. Let's see if we've had anything else come in.
One thing I can show you maybe is how to unplug it from the wire itself.
Yes, that'd be good. Thank you.
How do I do this? Because they try to separate the driver and the cord. I tend to be using my fingernails and get right into that small gap here and simply push and turn both, and it comes apart. For those who are interested, we also have different options. Of course, you saw that the drivers can be detached, and of course you can mount them to all other MMCX Shure modules or cords. This, for example, is the Bluetooth version, the BT2 model, and the drivers fit all the Shure cords and modules.
Thanks, Sasha. I have another really good one here from Marina, who asks, the PSM 1000 series receiver pack was updated last year to the P10R Plus. What are the additions, if any, to the old P10R receiver?
Oh, there's a lot we did there. The most important things are the audio. We introduced a hybrid system using digital capabilities to make the sound better. So allowing the sound being more, or allowing for a wider stereo image, and getting less preamp noise. That's what we did there.
Excellent. Yes, I think it's also worth mentioning that the same upgrades were made to the PSM 900 receivers as well. Is that correct, Sasha?
That's correct, yes. This is the P9RA Plus. Yep.
Okay. Just have a look. We've got a couple of questions coming in here now. Okay, there's a good one here. Again from John. Thanks so much for these questions, John. These are really good. John
Awesome.
says, my band is only a small local band. We don't have the need for a rack for our equipment. Do Shure manufacture a carry case or carry bag for the PSM 200 or the PSM 300? For those of us that only need one monitor system.
I don't think it will make a lot of sense for everyone to carry a bag with their in-ear monitoring system. It makes it much more mobile if you put it in a transportable rack. So what we usually do is you have these portable racks with like a trolley, and put everything in there for everyone. And of course you have like these small detachable, what do you call them? What's it called? Where you store all the accessories in, put everything in there, plus some spare batteries if they run out, and that's it.
I think just in addition to that, if I may, Sasha, another really good solution that I've seen for this is you can get sort of injection molded plastic cases with pick and pluck foam. And I've seen quite a lot of people, you know, just kind of pick the foam out to the shape of the rack equipment and then have a tidy case. If you are just using one piece of equipment, that can be a good solution to that.
I can show what I'm using.
Oh, that'd be really useful. Yeah, thank you.
For my PSM 300, I have this case from Shure, and you can see all the foam, and I put everything in there. So I have the transmitter and put it right in here, and everything is set for my gig with the handle.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, great question. Yeah. Thank you very much. Keep them coming in. We've had a few arrive. Let's see what we have here. So an interesting question from Sophie here. Sophie asks, how do you decide on the audio input level and high frequency boost? She asks if this is dependent on the cable. I don't think that it is dependent on the cable, but there is definitely an answer about how much level you would choose to feed into one of these transmitters. So what would you say about that, Sasha?
If you look at the input level on the front panel of the transmitter, that gives you an idea how to set the input level control. Hold on. You have a input knob here, and you can turn it, and it should not be an overload mode, but you should get a good signal. Usually if you use line level, it should be like right at noon, and that should serve you really well.
Let's see what we have.
In addition to that, of course, you can feed consumer audio too. So if you want to practice with a separate mix of audio you recorded, you can feed it onto one ear, and for example, your microphone on the other ear.
And that's a really good point, actually. That's, as we said earlier, as you said in your presentation, it's practicing within ears is very important. The last thing you want to do is just rock up without having used them, right?
And you can really hear the details. A lot of bands, they come back to me and say, since using in-ear monitoring, we've got so much tighter. It's a game changer for a lot of bands.
Okay, I've got a really good question here. And the question is, again, from Odysseys, any digital IEMs coming soon? Now, this is an interesting question. I think it's important that we talk about it and latency and all that kind of stuff. So, Sasha,
Exactly.
digital IEMs.
Well, it's a really difficult question because if you use digital stuff, usually you need a microprocessor taking your analog signal and convert it to digital. That usually takes time. The better the processor, the less latency you get, but you will always have a small latency. With Shure's extremely good processors used, we could go up to maybe 2 or 3 milliseconds. You will barely notice that, but you have to be careful because what you're using is a microphone. If you use a digital microphone, you will have latency there. Then you have the mixing console, which is the next up the road. And this usually is a digital console, resulting in getting even more latency. And if you were to use a digital in-ear monitoring system, so it goes on and on. And of course, if that adds to all the latency, then you will be at, like, let's say 12, 15 milliseconds. And if you sing into your microphone and you hear yourself just milliseconds after you talk into the microphone, then you don't know what's happening, what is going wrong, because it's later than you hear yourself in your head, and this is somewhat distorting to some people, or disturbing, sorry.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much, Sasha.
So to make this very quick, not right now. All Shure PSM monitoring systems are analog right now. And what we're using is digital technology to make the audio signal better and to widen up the stereo image.
Excellent. Very good answer. Thank you very much, Sasha. I've got another good one here that's come in from Mike Crow. And Mike asks, can a standard Shure UA874 antenna be used as a transmitter antenna with a combiner?
Not if you have the active antenna on, no. For in-ear monitoring, you need to use passive antennas only, because what you would do then, you would damage the combiner or the transmitter unit when putting some power on there. So never active.
Just as an extra kind of bit onto that question, could you talk about what antennas you would recommend to use with in-ear monitoring systems from our portfolio? Very
good question. Thank you very much. What you can use is you can use fins such as the PA805, and this can be used as a directional antenna on stage, or you can use helical antennas. such as the HA8089 or 8091 or 92. I'm not sure about that. It really depends on the stage. Usually, when I do presentations or webinars or whatnot, I tend to be using the PSM 300 combiner that is called PA411, and I can use the basic small antenna, and that served me for more than, I would say, 90 meters, 100 meters, and people are always amazed how far they can go with the transmitter or with the receiver this time. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks for covering that, Sasha. Okay, we have no further questions that have arrived in that either haven't been answered live or we haven't answered in the chat. So I think, given the time, I'll draw the Q&A to a close. If you do have extra questions, feel free to send them in. I think we'll leave the session open for a little bit once we stop the broadcast to kind of passively answer. But I'd like to take this opportunity. Oh, sorry, Sasha. Yes, carry on.
I can leave you with one more thing. If you're using in-ear monitoring together with another wireless pack, always make sure to bring your body in between the receiver and the transmitter on the other side, so they don't take away energy or they create intermodulations, which would refer to dropouts in your signal, right?
Is a really excellent parting tip. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much to Sasha for taking us through that session. Thank you to Jürgen as well for being on the Q&A. Thanks to all of you for joining and asking some excellent questions as well. That brings us an end to this session. I hope that it was informative and enlightening for you. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, and feel free to drop all the emails to support@shure.de with any further questions you would have. Thank you so much for your time. See you again soon.